Okay, people, the entire Nintendo Switch 2 pre-order situation just got even crazier because we have what I think is literally the longest tweet ever posted on the Nintendo Twitter accounts. It is just an absolute wall of text from Furukawa apologizing for the lack of units that they will have in Japan, explaining that they won't be able to have enough for people that have registered interest through the My Nintendo store. So that is what we are talking about today. The immense amount of interest in the Nintendo Switch 2 in Japan and what that means for how this console will actually end up selling. Because as it stands, I really don't see a scenario where this console doesn't break basically every record for a new video game console. So that is what we are talking about today. Of course, if you are new here and you enjoy Nintendo Switch 2 discussion, theories, speculation, all that fun stuff, I would appreciate you subscribing. Let's get into it. Alrighty, folks, welcome back to the channel. I hope your morning is going well. So, posting this early morning on Wednesday, we are having pre-orders tonight in America at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern. So anxiety is high, right? If you are trying to get a pre-order for this console, anxiety was already high. We know how these things go with pretty much every console launch. It usually sells out like that. It'll go away in just a few seconds, or if we're lucky, maybe a few minutes. So we were already worried about pre-orders. However, I was laying in bed and at like 3 a.m. Furukawa decided to drop this massive tweet on us explaining the demand in Japan. And I gotta be honest, reading this tweet, I am even more worried now than I was before. If you are trying or planning to get a Switch 2 in 2025, I genuinely think you might need to pre-order it. Before now, I was thinking, okay, there's a good chance they will be able to have this thing in stock on store shelves by Christmas, just for like the regular person walking into a Walmart, right? However, now that we have some concrete data from Nintendo, at least in terms of how much interest there is in the console, and to be fair, this is for Japan, I don't think so anymore. I think it's going to be a while before the Switch 2 is just on a store shelf ready for you to buy. So I don't know about y'all, but I am definitely locking in tonight at 9 p.m. when those pre-orders go live. I posted some pre-order guides over on my second channel at It's Amiibo. I will have those linked in the description down below, so definitely go check out those if you want some advice on how to secure a pre-order. But let's go ahead and actually read through this behemoth from Furukawa on the official Japanese Nintendo Twitter account. He says here, quote, "Hello, this is Furukawa." I love when he says that. "We have been procuring many materials and proceeding with production in advance so that we can deliver the Nintendo Switch 2 to you. On April 2nd, we announced details about the Nintendo Switch 2 and started accepting applications for the lottery sale on the My Nintendo store. As a result, we received an extremely large number of applications, approximately 2.2 million people in Japan alone. However, this number far exceeds our expectations and far exceeds the number of Nintendo Switch 2 consoles that can be delivered from the My Nintendo store on June 5th. Therefore, unfortunately, we expect that a significant number of customers will not be selected when the winners are announced tomorrow, April 24th. In order to avoid the trouble of those who were not selected in the first lottery sale having to reapply, My Nintendo store will automatically carry over those who were not selected in the first lottery sale to the second lottery sale. However, even including the quantity for the second lottery sale, we cannot fulfill all of the applications we received. We deeply apologize for not being able to meet your expectations despite our prior preparations. In response to this demand, we are currently working on further strengthening our production system. In addition, starting tomorrow, April 24th, game retailers and online stores nationwide will begin accepting pre-orders or lottery sales for the Nintendo Switch 2 console. Please check the information of each retailer for details. The console will also continue to be sold at the My Nintendo store after the release date. More details will be announced at a later date. With the cooperation of retailers, we will continue to ship the console and make efforts to get as many Nintendo Switch 2 consoles as possible into your hands. We plan to continue producing and shipping a considerable number of Nintendo Switch 2 units in the future. We apologize for the delay in our ability to meet your expectations, and we appreciate your understanding." So I'm going to be honest, when I first read this, I honestly could not believe it. Now, I think it's important to say this now so there is no confusion. Furukawa is saying in this tweet that 2.2 million Japanese Nintendo Switch account holders have registered their interest in pre-ordering a Nintendo Switch 2 through the My Nintendo store. This is not 2.2 million pre-orders confirmed. It is 2.2 million people registering to have the chance to pre-order the console. However, even though this is something that anybody could do for free as long as they have a My Nintendo account, 2.2 million people entering to have the chance to pre-order a console just in Japan just through the My Nintendo store, not even counting other retailers. That is absolutely, positively bonkers. And of course, the other thing that Furukawa talks about in the tweets is that they do not have enough. They do not have enough units to actually fulfill that many orders through the My Nintendo store. So 2.2 million is a massive number, but it's not a one-to-one tell of how many consoles will sell on launch day in Japan. However, it is the first real metric we have for how much interest there is in the console, and for it to be that high is just absolutely crazy. And unless they truly are ill-prepared, which I don't think is the case because they have been talking such a big game over the past year about how they're going to try and combat scalpers and they're going to try to have ample supply available, unless they just somehow have like no stock, like less than Switch 1 stock available in each region, I would be kind of shocked at this point if this is not the biggest console launch of all time, not just for Nintendo, but of all time between all console manufacturers. So just to like kind of contextualize everything, let's talk about the Nintendo Switch. It's on track to become the best-selling console of all time. It is another hybrid console, and it was their last console. So I think this is a fair point of comparison, especially when looking at the Japanese numbers. So for the first week in Japan, the Nintendo Switch sold 330,000 units. That is not a number to scoff at, don't get me wrong, but 330,000 against even just the registered interest and people trying to pre-order a Nintendo Switch 2 in Japan, that is a gulf in difference, right? That is a massive difference in just the sheer interest in the console. Would the Switch have sold more had there been more units? Absolutely. That thing was out of stock, but it was only out of stock until like July. Around July, you did start seeing the Switch pop up in stores around the time that Splatoon 2 came out. At least here in America, I'm not sure if the situation was different in Japan, but you have to imagine if 2.2 million people registered to enter like the pre-order lottery here, a good chunk of that would actually commit and pick a console up on launch day if given the option. So I think it is a given at this point that the Switch 2 at the very least will have the biggest launch of any console in Japan. The bigger question is, can it beat the worldwide record? I believe that is currently held by the PS5, funnily enough. Back during COVID in November of 2020, the PS5 sold 3.4 million units in its first month worldwide. That is all inclusive. The PS5 was notoriously hard to get, so had there been more supply there, it probably would have sold quite a few million more than that. But if Nintendo has more than that available between all regions, it is going to absolutely obliterate that record. And while we don't know the numbers and the split between each region, we have reason to at least think that Nintendo is prepared to some degree, but clearly in Japan, their second biggest markets, they still weren't as prepared as they needed to be. Here's a quote from Furukawa at an investor meeting back in 2024. He was asked if they were taking measures against scalpers and what they were doing to make sure that the next console would have a sufficient amount of stock available at launch, and Furukawa responded saying, "As a countermeasure against resale, we believe that the most important thing is to produce a solid number of products that can meet customer demand, and this idea has not changed since last year. In addition to that, we are considering whether we can take some measures within the scope permitted by laws and regulations based on the circumstances of each region to prevent scalping. In addition, last year and the year before that, there was a shortage of semiconductor components that prevented us from producing hardware for the Nintendo Switch in sufficient quantities, but the situation has now been resolved. As for the successor models, we do not believe that the shortage of parts will have a significant impact on production at this time." So, broadly speaking, and it wasn't just this, there were other quotes from Furukawa sprinkled throughout 2024 and even earlier this year. They were talking a really big game about how confident they were that they were going to be able to, first of all, stop scalpers, but also to have ample supply ready. They really thought that they were going to produce enough of this console and just be ready to go out the gate with millions and millions of units. But even still, even with all of the preparation, even though I know a lot of people still think they delayed it from 2024 to 2025 to make sure that stock was ready, the demand for the Switch 2 in Japan is still far exceeding the actual supply available. So really, and I think this applies to all regions, but especially Japan, as many units as they can make, they will sell. I think if you are in Japan, it's going to be a while before it is a simple process to actually secure a Switch 2, and that is in large part due to the pricing in Japan. Of course, in the US and in Europe, we are losing our minds about the pricing of this console, but in Japan, it's actually quite cheap because of the weaker yen right now. It's 50,000 yen for the region-locked Nintendo Switch 2. They have a special region-locked version so people don't import it, but it essentially costs about $350 US. So I think it being cheaper over there would also definitely be a big reason for why there is so much interest. To me, I look at all this and I'm like, okay, the Switch 2 is going to sell out in Japan. There's really no question about that. Now the question becomes, how much interest is there in America? Pre-orders already went up in Europe and in the UK, and from what I can tell, it was a pretty smooth process as long as you just happened to be there when the pre-orders went up. You were able to, go through checkout and all the different retailers and everything. But as far as I can tell, in at least most countries, they have sold out. They are gone now. But what does this all mean for the US, which is Nintendo's biggest market? I talked earlier about the first week sales for Japan for the Nintendo Switch 1, but let's take a look at that first full month ending March 31st, 2017, I guess quarter 4 of their fiscal year. So they shipped a total of 2.74 million Switch units back then in 2017. About 940,000 of those were in Europe as well as just other territories. 600,000 of those were in Japan, so in the 3 weeks following launch, they sold about 260,000 units in Japan, but then there was also 1.2 million sold in the Americas. So Japan is this massive market for Nintendo, obviously. That is where they are located. Handhelds are especially popular in Japan, so yeah, it makes sense that Nintendo's going to sell well there pretty much no matter what, as long as they are releasing some sort of handheld console. For them to have sold double in the Americas, that has me really worried. That has me really worried about how easy this thing will be to get here in the United States, but also in Canada, of course. Now, given that America is a bigger market for them, of course, they will have more stock allocated to the US, to Canada, to these places. I just really worry if 2.2 million people registered to enter a lottery to pre-order this thing in Japan just through one store, the My Nintendo store, not counting other retailers in Japan. Keep that in mind. If that many people registered the interest there, what does that mean for America? Now, granted, the Switch 2 is more expensive here versus Japan. It's about $100 more expensive in America. I'm sure they'll have more stock here. I'm just worried that they still will not have anywhere near enough. And I guess we'll find out tonight, right? When the pre-orders do go live on Best Buy and Target and Walmart, and then tomorrow morning at GameStop, we're going to see just how much demand there really is for this console in the US. We'll see people lining up at GameStop to get their pre-order in if they miss it overnight on the websites. It's going to be a wild time. With how much pent-up demand there was for a Switch successor, I mean, we have been talking about this console for years. Even a lot of, I guess, normies, right, that don't follow gaming news like we do, even they, I feel like, are at a point of just like wanting an upgrade from Nintendo. And even despite that $450 price tag, I think for most of us, it was a given it would sell out this year. But like I said earlier, I was still kind of expecting, okay, maybe it sells out first wave, maybe they have a second wave in late summer. Of course, that'll sell out as well. But I was thinking, yeah, by Christmas, sure, they can have enough stock ready by then for little Timmy to get a Switch 2 under the Christmas tree for $450. But as it stands, unless something changes here, with how much demand it sounds like there really is, at least in Japan, I just don't really see that being the case. I think it's going to be a while before you are able to confidently walk into a store and just grab one of these things off of the shelf, or I guess ask the employee to unlock it for you. The PS5 had very different circumstances with the chips shortages that were going on during COVID, of course, but it took a long time for that console to be readily available. I mean, it wasn't really until I want to say 2022, so like a year and a half, almost 2 years after the PS5 came out, that it was just easy to go into a store and buy. You look back to the Wii, that took a long time as well to actually become readily available. With everything going on with all of the tariffs and the uncertainties of the market, I just wonder, like, when do things stabilize? When does the market stabilize a little bit? And how will that affect Nintendo's allotments for the different regions, right? You imagine if there's a 145% tariff on China, or I think it's a 45% tariff on Vietnam, where they are manufacturing the Switch console itself now, what will that mean for the allotment in the US this Christmas, assuming that all goes through after this 90-day pause that Trump did? Does that mean Nintendo allocates more of their stock to Europe and Japan? Does that mean they later raise the price in the holiday period and say, hey, $450 was an introductory price? I don't think that's that unlikely. I gotta be honest, and I know this isn't what people want to hear, I don't think it's that unlikely, especially if the demand is so high for this console and it does sell out so fast, way beyond their expectations. Yeah, I could see Nintendo slipping that price up a little bit this holiday, and maybe they keep that Mario Kart bundle around to make the deal feel a little bit sweeter. But yeah, interesting times, scary times. If you want to get a Switch 2 on launch day, I would say you need to lock in tonight and try to get a pre-order. Otherwise, it is going to be a while. And I also do worry about those accessories as well. There's a lot to worry about. We'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments down below. How do you think the Switch 2 is going to fare in the short term in 2025, but also long term? How do you think this console is going to sell in the long run? I would love to get a conversation going down below. Of course, good luck to you all if you are trying to pre-order the console tonight. Godspeed to you, brave soldiers. I really hope everybody watching this video is able to get one if they are trying to get one. If you're not trying to get one, of course, that is fine as well. But let me know your thoughts. Of course, subscribe here for more Nintendo Switch 2 coverage, news, discussion, all that fun stuff. Follow me on Twitter at BoTalksGames. Check out my other channel at Etsubiable. Once again, I do have some pre-order guides over there. Definitely watch those real quick before pre-orders go live in just, like 12 hours or so here. And as always, you can click on one of the 2 videos on screen to listen to me ramble about even more Nintendo stuff. Until next time, folks. Peace.